Emma Caldwell had always imagined that motherhood would come to her naturally, the way spring returns to Iowa without being asked. But on most mornings in their modest apartment on the west side of Cedar Rapids, she woke not with the quiet expectation of new life, but with the heavy awareness that nothing inside her body was changing. She and her husband, Ryan, had been married for nearly 8 years, building a life that was simple and gentle. Their apartment wasn't large, but it was warm, full of soft lamplight, second-hand furniture polished with care, and photos from weekend drives along the Cedar River. To anyone looking in from the outside, they might have seemed entirely content, and in some ways they were. They cooked together. They laughed often enough. They knew how to comfort each other after long work days. But beneath all that warmth lay a tender, pulsing ache neither could escape. They wanted a child, and no matter how much they hoped, prayed, or tried, that child never came. The first time Emma saw a negative pregnancy test, she told herself it was only the beginning. The second time, she tried to smile through it. By the 5th, the smile was gone. And by the 10th, she was already bracing herself before she even opened the foil wrapper. Still, they kept trying. And when trying alone no longer felt like enough, they turned to treatment. The IVF clinic in Iowa City became their second home. Emma could still recall the soft chill of the exam rooms, the reassuring but practiced tone of the nurses, the quiet hum of machines behind closed doors. She memorized every instruction, took each hormone injection with trembling hands, and tried as best she could to believe in a future where 2 lines would finally appear on a test. Each cycle brought a brief flare of hope, delicate and bright, like the shimmer of frost-catching morning light. And each cycle ended the same way. 1 line instead of 2. Silence instead of celebration. Tears muffled into a pillow so Ryan wouldn't hear, but he always did. He would stand in the doorway, watching her shoulders shake, unsure whether to go to her or give her space. He hurt in his own quiet way, deeply, but he made sure the weight of his sadness never added to hers. He learned to cry in the shower, to wipe his face before stepping back into the kitchen, to keep his voice gentle even when everything inside him was unraveling. After the 3rd cycle, Emma stopped talking during the long drives home from Iowa City. After the 4th, she started apologizing for things that weren't her fault. After the 5th, she stopped apologizing altogether and shifted into a muted version of herself, moving through days as though she were made of tissue paper, delicate and easily torn. The doctor, a steady man who had seen too many couples carried hope like an anchor, tried to speak gently when he finally said, "Emma, your body needs a break." He explained the risks, the strain on her hormones, the toll on her physical and emotional well-being, the cumulative weight of repeated disappointment. He suggested time, rest, a pause before anything else. Ryan reached for her hand. Emma pulled hers back. It wasn't anger. She simply couldn't bear being touched when she felt so hollow. On the drive home, the radio stayed off. The silence cracked against them like thin ice, giving way under footsteps. And when they reached their apartment, Emma went straight to the bedroom, closed the door softly, and folded onto the bed as if gravity had finally won. To her, stopping treatment felt like giving up on the future she'd promised Ryan the day they married. It felt like failing him, failing herself, failing the life they had dreamed of, one with laughter in the hallway and small shoes by the front door. Ryan stood outside the closed bedroom door, forehead pressed to the wood, wishing there was something, anything he could do to lift the weight she carried. But there was nothing left to fix, no next step, no new treatment to chase. Just grief spreading quietly between them, not loud enough to destroy their marriage, but deep enough to exhaust it. And so, the days continued, soft, careful, and heavy, as if the walls themselves were waiting for a child who never came. The weeks after the final IVF appointment stretched out like a long, gray winter. Emma moved through her days with quiet determination, doing what needed to be done at work. answering messages from friends, cooking dinner beside Ryan, but nothing inside her warmed. The absence, she felt, wasn't just physical. It was the kind that seeped into the walls of their home, into the pauses of their conversations, into the way she lingered at the sink after washing the last dish. Ryan sensed it. He didn't rush her. He didn't push. But in the soft hours of the evening, when the two of them sat on the old brown couch in their Cedar Rapids apartment, he would sometimes speak gently about possibilities, ones they hadn't dared consider before. "Have you ever thought about adoption?" he asked one night, his voice low, careful. He kept his eyes on the mug in his hands, as if the steam rising from it might soften his words. Emma stiffened. She didn't answer at first. When she finally did, her voice broke on the edges. I don't want you to settle," she whispered. "Not for someone else's child. Not because my body couldn't," she couldn't finish. The rest dissolved into the quiet. Ryan slid closer, but she turned away, hugging her knees. It wasn't rejection, it was shame. She still felt broken, as though her worth had been tied to the biological child she could never give him. The world didn't make it easier. News of pregnancies seemed to come in waves from cousins, coworkers, old college friends. Baby showers filled social media feeds. Birth announcements arrived in the mail. Emma smiled politely when congratulations were expected of her, but every new baby felt like a reminder of what she couldn't give. It was a Saturday afternoon in late March when everything shifted. Emma was sitting at the small dining table with her laptop open, paying bills and half-heartedly browsing through local news. A link caught her eye: Iowa City Foster Care Center. Children waiting for families. She didn't know why she clicked it. Maybe she was tired of feeling hopeless. Maybe she was curious. Maybe she was ready for something to change, even if she didn't realize it. Profile photos loaded one by one, each accompanied by a short description. Emma scrolled slowly. She wasn't expecting anything. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Then she saw him. A thin boy with steady gray-blue eyes, a shy half-smile, and hair that fell across his forehead the same way Ryan's had in old childhood pictures. The resemblance was so uncanny, so startling, that Emma's breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer to the screen, heart hammering. It couldn't be, and yet it was there, in the eyes, in the tilt of the chin, in something she couldn't quite name but deeply felt. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. Ryan answered on the second ring. "There's someone," she said, her voice trembling in a way he hadn't heard in months. "You need to come see this." When he got home, she turned the laptop toward him without a word. Ryan froze, even through the grainy foster care photo. The likeness struck him hard, so hard he needed to sit down. He stared at the boy's face for a long moment, stunned into silence. Emma swallowed, her eyes shining with something fragile and new. "We need to meet him," she said softly but firmly, as if the words themselves were anchoring her. Ryan nodded, not because he fully understood, but because he felt the same pull. And so they began. Paperwork, background checks, mandatory parent training, a home study that required them to look at their lives through the eyes of strangers. It was daunting, exhausting, but for the first time in a very long time, they weren't moving through darkness. They were moving toward something, toward someone. The photo of the boy didn't leave Ryan's mind. It stayed with him long after Emma closed the laptop, long after the house fell quiet for the night, even as he lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling. That familiar face, familiar in a way that shouldn't have been possible, pulled something loose inside him, something he'd buried decades ago. By morning, the past he had spent half his life forcing into silence had fully resurfaced. It began with the smell of stale cigarette smoke drifting from a neighbor's open window, an ordinary scent, but enough to rip him backward through time, back to Davenport, back to the dim, sagging duplex on the edge of town, back to the sound of bottles clinking in the sink and the way his mother's footsteps always seemed unsteady. Ryan had grown up knowing how to pour cereal for dinner, how to stay silent during one of his mother's hazy moods, how to recognize the difference between her angry slur and her tired one. He knew how to move quietly across creaking floorboards, how to keep himself small, how to avoid drawing attention. There were days she forgot meals, days she forgot conversations. Sometimes she forgot she had children at all. But he had Vicky. His older sister was only 3 years ahead of him, but she felt like a lifeline. She was thin, quick, and sharp-eyed, always listening, always inventing. When there wasn't enough food, she pretended they were explorers rationing for a long journey. When the electricity shut off, she turned their dark bedroom into a storybook cave lit by imaginary fireflies. She wasn't just a sister. She was his world builder. Her stories carried them through nights when the house felt too cold or too loud or too hungry. She created places where they were safe, loved, chosen. Worlds where the heroes looked suspiciously like the two of them, ragged kids with brave hearts and invisible capes. His favorite was the Cloud Kingdom. Vicky would describe it in a whisper, her voice soft but certain. A place in the sky where the hungry never stayed hungry and the tired never stayed tired. A place where the boy with light, Ryan, could shine so bright he warmed the whole kingdom. He had believed her, not because the stories were real, but because Vicky made them feel real. There were no toys in their house, no Verzegifts, sometimes no heat, but there was Vicky's imagination, vivid enough to paint entire universes over peeling walls. She could turn a cracked plastic bowl into a treasure, a torn curtain into a magic cloak, a broken sidewalk into a secret road. She had been brilliant in the way some children are when they're forced to fill the empty spaces adults leave behind. Ryan remembered her thin arms wrapped around him when he cried after school. He remembered her brushing dirt off his scraped knees. He remembered her promising, always promising, that they would find a better life someday. But what he remembered most was her face the night she disappeared from his life. He had been 9. She was 12. Their mother had gotten into trouble again. Something about failing to pick them up from school for 2 days straight. Child Protective Services had stepped in. Vicky was sent to one foster home, Ryan to another. They promised the separation was temporary. It wasn't. He never saw her again. Ryan grew up with that ache lodged deep inside him. The knowledge that the one person who had saved him from the worst parts of their childhood had been taken. From him, without warning. Without explanation, without goodbye. As an adult, he learned not to chase that pain. Not to ask questions. Not to open the places where memories lived. When something hurts long enough, the mind learns to step carefully around it. But now, because of one grainy photograph on a foster care website, everything he had sealed away was stirring. The boy's face, the shape of his jaw, the quiet, searching look in his eyes. It wasn't just resemblance. It was recognition, a sign, a reminder, a wound reopening. Ryan found himself wondering things he hadn't dared ask in 20 years. Where had Vicky ended up? Was she alive? Healthy? Safe? Did she ever have children? Could this boy, in some impossible twist of fate, be connected to her? He didn't say any of this to Emma, not yet. The questions were too raw, too tangled. But as the past flared back into painful clarity, one truth rose above all the rest. This child wasn't just another profile. Not to him. He felt drawn to the boy the way he had once been drawn to Vicky's stories, by something deep, instinctive, impossible to ignore. Ryan's resurfacing memories didn't come back gently. They came back sharp, edges intact, colors too vivid, sounds too close. And the deeper they returned, the more they pulled him into places he had spent decades trying to forget. He remembered the bullies first. He had been a small kid, thin, quiet, easy to overlook until someone needed a target. The neighborhood boys were older, stronger, bored enough to find entertainment in cruelty. They taunted him for his clothes, for the way his voice shook when he answered a question, for the way he tried to walk quickly without drawing attention. Sometimes they pushed him. Sometimes they shoved his head into the dirt. Once, they forced him to hand over the cracked plastic bracelet Vicky had made for him out of twine and beads. She'd found the beads behind the laundromat and treated them as if they were treasure. He had tried to fight back. He really had, but he was too small, too scared, too hungry to stand his ground. So every time, it was Vicky who stepped between them, thin as she was, arms spread, chin lifted with a fierceness he could never forget. She always told them to leave him alone. She always took the hits meant for him, and even when the boys walked off laughing, she would turn back to Ryan with a smile that didn't match the bruise forming on her cheek. "Hey," she'd whisper, brushing dirt from his shirt. "You're okay. We're okay." He never understood how she could comfort him when she was hurting so much more. But the bruises from neighborhood boys weren't the worst ones. Not by far. Everything changed when their mother brought home Frank Dalton. Frank wasn't loud. He wasn't sloppy. He wasn't the kind of drunk who stumbled or ranted. He was the kind who simmered beneath the surface, the kind whose anger came out in carefully measured steps. Cold, deliberate, unmistakable. His presence filled the small duplex until there barely seemed room to breathe. Ryan learned to recognize the cadence of his footsteps the way other kids recognize their mother's voices. Frank wasn't impressed by Vicky. "She's slow," he said one night, shrugging as if making a simple observation. "Not right in the head. Won't amount to anything." Ryan had heard those words many times before, from teachers who didn't see her brilliance, from neighbors who saw her thin frame and shy eyes and assumed she was fragile. But coming from Frank, the words carried something darker, something final. A week later, he made the decision. "Boy can stay," Frank announced, nodding at Ryan. "He's quiet, doesn't cause trouble." Ryan didn't understand at first. Not until Frank turned toward his mother and added, "But the girl goes. County'll handle her. They've got a place for kids like that." A place. A state facility. A place kids didn't come back from. Their mother said nothing. She just looked at the floor, jaw clenched, hands trembling against her glass. The day they came to take Vicky, Ryan clung to her with every ounce of strength he had. She was crying, but she wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, trying to be brave for him. She knelt so they were eye level, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear, like she always did. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "You're going to be okay." She promised she would write. She promised she would come back. She promised this wasn't goodbye. But even at 9 years old, Ryan knew when someone was lying to make things less painful. Frank grabbed Ryan by the arms and pulled him away so hard his feet scraped across the floor. Ryan screamed, kicked, clawed, anything to get back to her. His mother shouted for him to stop. Frank tightened his grip, and then just before the door closed, he saw it. Around her neck, dangling from a thin piece of string, was the burgundy toy airplane he'd made for her on her birthday out of cardboard and marker. She'd worn it every day since. It was her favorite thing in the world because it represented everything she dreamed of: escape, sky, freedom. She was still wearing it when the car drove away. That was the last image he ever had of her. Small hands pressed against a window, cheeks wet with tears. The little burgundy airplane bouncing softly against her chest as the distance grew. He never saw her again. And now, decades later, that memory, especially that airplane, rose with a force that stunned him, because something about the boy in the photo, about the tilt of his chin, about the light in his eyes, made the wound he'd buried so carefully split wide open again. And whether he admitted it or not, Ryan knew. The past wasn't done with him. The drive to Iowa City felt different from every trip they had ever taken there before. No clinic appointments, no sterile holguas, no medical charts full of hopes that never materialized. This time, the air in the car carried something gentler, lighter, a cautious excitement that neither of them dared name aloud. Emma sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the endless stretch of cornfields and November gray sky. Ryan kept both hands on the wheel, his expression calm enough to pass for composure, if she hadn't known him as well as she did. Inside, he was a storm. They arrived early. Too early. The social worker, Ms. Joyce Reed, greeted them with a polite but warm smile and led them to a small playroom designed to ease nerves, though it did the opposite for both of them. The walls were painted pale yellow, dotted with hand-drawn clouds and wobbly rainbows. A low bookshelf held worn picture books. Bins of toys sat in neat rows. A tiny table with crayon marks stood in the center of the room. The place looked like a preschool classroom, softened by years of children who had passed through hoping to be chosen. Emma and Ryan sat side by side on the small couch, trying not to look as anxious as they felt. Ryan's leg bounced. Emma kept smoothing her sweater. "Take your time," Joyce said gently. "He's a little shy at first." But when the door finally opened, the boy who stepped inside wasn't shy, he was wary. Thin, tense, eyes sharp as if measuring danger in every new face. His hair fell over his forehead in the same unruly way as in the photo. His shoulders were slightly hunched, as though expecting to be scolded for taking up space. Emma's breath caught. Ryan's heart stopped. But it wasn't the boy's face that sent a jolt through him. It was the object hanging from the boy's neck. A small, burgundy airplane. Plastic, not cardboard, but the same size, the same shape. The same color as the one he had made for Vicky all those years ago. Attached to a thin cord. Bouncing softly against the boy's chest with every hesitant step he took into the room. Ryan went rigid. His pulse roared in his ears. Everything, the present, the past, the bruises, the separation, the sound of Vicky's voice, collapsed into one blinding moment. He couldn't look away. Joyce crouched beside the boy. "Evan, sweetheart, these are Emma and Ryan. They've come to meet you." Evan didn't speak. He just stared at them with guarded curiosity, as if he wanted to trust but had learned not to. Emma offered the softest smile. Evan. "We're really happy to see you." The boy's fingers tightened around the strap of his small backpack. He took one step closer. Ryan forced himself to breathe. Evan whisperat. His voice was thin, but something in it tugged at Ryan, something he couldn't name, something that made the room tilt for a second. Joyce straightened and encouraged Evan to choose a toy to play with. He scanned the room, then drifted toward a bin of wooden blocks. His movements were cautious, deliberate. He picked up a block, turned it over in his hand, then quietly carried it to the little table. Emma followed his lead, kneeling beside him. "Can I help you build something?" Evan looked at her, really looked, and nodded. Ryan watched, unable to shake the feeling clawing inside him. He knelt too, his voice soft. "What do you like to build?" Evan shrugged. "Plain sometimes." The word hit Ryan like a blow. He swallowed hard. "That's nice." Joyce excused herself to give them space. Emma and Evan began stacking blocks. Slowly at first, then with more confidence. And as the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. Evan warmed to them, not just a little, quickly, naturally, as though his hesitation evaporated the moment Emma spoke to him. He showed her how he liked to line the blocks by color. He looked up at Ryan every so often, as if searching his face for answers to questions he couldn't voice. And every time the boy moved, the burgundy airplane swung gently on the string, catching Ryan's eye again and again. Emma felt her heart swell. Hope flooded her so powerfully she could barely contain it. Ryan wasn't flooded with hope. He was trembling with recognition, with fear, with the certainty that something from his past had just stepped into the room wearing a burgundy airplane around its neck. And whatever this child's story was, it was about to collide with his. Evan's walls didn't fall all at once, just small bricks at a time, shifting carefully like he was testing the air around him. At the little table in the playroom, he began stacking blocks again, but this time he spoke in shy fragments. "School's okay," he murmured, eyes still lowered. "I like reading better. And cars. I know all the models." Emma leaned in, keeping her voice soft so she wouldn't overwhelm him. "Cars? Really? Ryan loves cars too." Evan looked up at Ryan with a flicker of interest. "Do you like Mustangs?" Ryan nodded. "A lot. What year's your favorite?" Evan's lips twitched, almost a smile. 67. Ryan's chest tightened. Good choice. The moment felt small, simple, but profound. Evan wasn't a child who warmed easily. Anyone could see that. He was cautious, observant, the kind of boy who watched before speaking. Yet here he was, offering pieces of himself within minutes. Emma's heart fluttered with every word he shared. Then Evan touched the burgundy airplane resting against his chest, turning it between his fingers. Someone gave this to me a long time ago," he said, quietly. "I don't remember who." Ryan felt something in him crack open. He forced his voice steady. "It's special." Evan nodded. "Yeah, I don't like taking it off." Ryan swallowed hard and said nothing more. When their hour was up, social worker Joyce returned. She observed them for a while, amazed at what she saw. "This is unusual," she told them gently as Evan wandered to the bookshelf. "He doesn't connect with people this fast, especially adults." Emma and Ryan exchanged a look, hopeful, terrified. On the drive home, Emma held her phone the entire time. Each vibration, each notification made her inhale sharply. "What if another family applies first?" she whispered, staring out the window. "What if someone's ahead of us in the process?" "They won't be," Ryan said. "We'll move quickly." But even as he reassured her, he felt the unease twisting inside him, not from the adoption process, but from the past he couldn't shake loose. That night, after Emma finally drifted into restless sleep, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The darkness didn't quiet his mind. It sharpened everything. He saw Vicky's face, thin, determined, always smiling even when she was bruised. He heard her voice, weaving the stories she created to protect him. He saw her standing in the doorway the day she was taken away, the burgundy airplane bouncing on its string. He saw the boy in the playroom, wearing that same color, that same shape. He remembered the way Evan's eyes, gray-blue, steady, watchful, mirrored the eyes of the sister he had lost. He replayed every detail from their meeting, every expression, every gesture, listening as something old and painful pressed itself against something new and fragile. Could it be possible? Could the boy be connected to Vicky? Could he be? No. It was too impossible, too dangerous, too hopeful. But the resemblance, the airplane, the way Ryan felt an instinctive pull toward him, as if something in the universe had nudged them back toward a broken line in Ryan's life. He turned his head to look at Emma sleeping beside him. She had cried quietly on the drive home, afraid Evan might slip through their fingers before the process was complete. He didn't want to burden her with his fears, not when she finally had hope again, tremulous and bright. So he kept everything inside. He didn't tell her about the memories flooding back. He didn't tell her about the uncanny resemblance that made his heart ache. He didn't tell her about the thought, wild, impossible, that maybe fate wasn't finished with him. Instead, he closed his eyes and held the silence, letting the questions echo through him in the dark. Questions he wasn't ready to voice. Questions he feared the answers to. Questions that made him wonder if the boy they met wasn't just a child waiting for a family, but a thread leading back to the sister he had lost. The weeks that followed moved in a blur, fast, structured, full of tasks that were both exhausting and incredibly precious. Adoption wasn't simple. Iowa required mandatory training sessions, background checks, safety inspections, fire escape plans, and pages upon pages of documentation. But for the first time in years, Emma and Ryan didn't dread the paperwork. Every form felt like a step closer to Evan. On Tuesday evenings, they attended state-mandated, trauma-informed parenting classes in a community center off Collins Road. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they learned about attachment injuries, sensory overwhelm, and how children in foster care often tested boundaries, not out of defiance, but out of fear. Emma took meticulous notes. Ryan listened with a seriousness that caused even the instructor to pause and smile at him. "These kids often want love," the instructor said, "but they've learned that love can disappear." Emma wrote the line down twice. Home inspections followed. A social worker walked through their Cedar Rapids apartment, opening cabinets, checking outlet covers, testing smoke detectors, reviewing the floor plan. She asked about routines, communication styles, conflict resolution, questions meant to ensure stability. Ryan didn't mind the scrutiny. He'd lived through instability. He wanted every box checked. But the hardest preparation wasn't in the requirements. It was in the second bedroom. They had kept it shut for years. A quiet shrine to the future they had once imagined. A crib they never bought, walls they never painted, dreams they folded away like fragile keepsakes. Opening the door now sent a gust of dust into the hallway and a twist of emotion through both their chests. "We should make it his," Emma whispered. So they did. They vacuumed, scrubbed, wiped down windows, and opened the curtains to let in a wash of winter light. They painted the walls a soft blue-gray, a color Evan had mentioned liking during one of their playroom visits. They bought a bed with a sturdy frame, sheets with little clouds on them, and a comforter that was warm but not too heavy. Evan didn't like heavy blankets. When the packages of clothes arrived, t-shirts, jeans, pajamas, socks, Emma sat on the bed and folded each one slowly, carefully. Halfway through a stack of tiny cotton shirts, she stopped. Her shoulders shook. Tears splashed onto the soft fabric. Ryan knelt beside her silently. "I didn't think I'd ever get to do this," she whispered, clutching a shirt to her chest. "I thought maybe this part of my life was just gone." Ryan wrapped an arm around her, grounding her as she cried, not with despair this time, but with something gentler, deeper, almost reverent. Later that week, when Emma was out picking up more items for the room, Ryan stopped by a hardware store. He told himself he was only looking. He told himself he wasn't being sentimental. But when he saw a small, simple wooden shelf, just wide enough to hold a row of toy airplanes, he felt something settle in his chest. He bought it. He installed it that evening above the dresser, leveling it with meticulous care. He stood back, imagining Evan placing something special there one day, something precious enough to display. Maybe that burgundy airplane, maybe others if he wanted them. When Emma saw the shelf, she didn't question it. She just touched his arm softly. "He'll love it." Transition visits began soon after. What was normally a slow, cautious process moved more quickly than anyone expected because Evan kept choosing them. He reached for Emma's hand when they walked through the center's hallway. He sat closer to Ryan each visit. He laughed a soft, startled laugh when Ryan helped him build a Lego plane during their fourth meeting. Social worker Joyce watched all of it with a mixture of surprise and relief. "It's rare for him to attach this fast," she said after one visit. "He feels safe with you too. Really safe." The words made Emma cover her mouth, tears welling again. Ryan's jaw tightened, not with fear this time, but with a sense of something profound taking shape beneath the surface. The paperwork cleared. The home study was approved. Final transition visits were scheduled. Everything was falling into place, piece by careful piece. But for Ryan, each step forward carried a dual sensation: joy for the child they were bringing home, and an ache tied to the memories rising like ghosts behind him. Evan wasn't just entering their lives. He was pulling the past into the light with him. In the days leading up to Evan's final transition home, Emma lived in a state of breathless anticipation. She checked her phone every hour. She kept the ringer volume on high even while she showered, and every morning before work. She called the Iowa City Foster Care Center just to ask, "Is Evan okay today? Did he sleep well? Has he eaten? Has he said anything about us?" The staff were patient, kind, even amused sometimes, but they reassured her each time. "He's doing well, Emma. He's safe. And yes, he keeps asking when he'll see you two again." Emma would hang up with a trembling smile, clutching her phone to her chest. To her, this was what hope felt like. Not the fragile hope tied to test strips and lab results, but something sturdier, warmer, alive. She floated through her days. Ryan did not. While Emma's joy expanded, Ryan's fear crept quietly inward. He didn't tell her what he was doing late at night when she fell asleep with her hand resting protectively over the spot on the bed where Evan might one day curl up beside them. He waited until her breathing settled, then slipped out of the room, turned on his laptop, and sat in the glow of the cold screen. He searched everything. Davenport Youth Shelters, 1999-2003. Iowa Missing Child Reports by County. State Facility Transfer Logs. Juvenile Case Records from Scott County. Every lead was a dead end. Every record, he hoped, would reveal a sliver of Vicky's fate dissolved under missing files, outdated databases, sealed documents. Her name came up nowhere. Her story, at least on paper, simply stopped. But Ryan remembered her too vividly for her to vanish, so completely. He remembered her eyes, gray-blue like Evan's. He remembered her crooked smile, the same one Evan showed when stacking Lego wings. He remembered her imagination, wild, bright, soaring. Evan's drawings showed airplanes, cloud cities, and little people turning into heroes. Patterns Ryan knew far too well. And the burgundy airplane. Always the burgundy airplane. He sat there night after night, staring at Evan's photo and feeling that eerie pull tighten around his ribs. He wanted answers. He wanted them desperately. But to chase those answers meant digging into painful histories connected to a child who had barely begun to trust him. And Ryan knew what it meant to lose trust. He knew what it did to a child. He also knew Evan was fragile, more fragile than he let on. Beneath his quick attachment was an undercurrent of fear, hesitation, survival instinct. Ryan saw it in the way Evan watched doors, in the way he flinched at loud noises, in the way he scanned adults' faces before speaking. If Ryan started asking questions, real questions, he could risk unraveling the very foundation Evan was building with them. He couldn't do that, so he carried the questions alone. During meals, Emma would chatter excitedly about school supply shopping or signing Evan up for a reading program at the library. Ryan nodded, smiled when he could, but Emma eventually noticed how quiet he had become. One afternoon, she paused mid-sentence. "Ryan, are you scared? I mean, about becoming a dad." He froze. That wasn't it. Not at all. But he couldn't tell her the truth, not when she was finally experiencing joy untainted by grief. So he offered a partial truth. "A little, I guess. It's a big change." Emma softened immediately. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "We'll figure everything out together. He already loves you, Ryan. I can see it." Ryan looked down at their hands, swallowing the knot in his throat. Emma mistook his silence for nerves. Maybe that was a mercy. Inside, the conflict only deepened. He wanted to uncover the truth of Evan's past. He wanted to know if the resemblance was coincidence or blood. He wanted to believe fate had finally given him a chance to reconnect with the sister ripped away from him. But above all, he refused to risk hurting Evan. So Ryan stayed silent, carrying his fear alone. While Emma's joy rose around them like sunlight he couldn't quite step into. The final meeting at the Iowa City Foster Care Center felt unreal, as if Emma and Ryan were moving through a dream they had been afraid to imagine for years. The conference room was small and practical. Gray carpet, metal filing cabinets, a circular table covered in neatly stacked documents. But to Emma, it looked like the gateway to a new life. Joyce, the social worker, placed the last packet of forms before them. Once you sign, Evan's official placement begins today. He goes home with you. Emma's breath hitched. Ryan nodded quietly, his hand steady but his heart pounding. Signatures were followed by dates, initials, verification stamps. Formalities that marked the end of a journey and the beginning of something far greater. When the final page was signed, Joyce's warm smile softened even further. "He's waiting in the playroom," she said. "He's been asking since morning." Emma didn't walk down the hallway. She practically flew. When she stepped into the playroom, Evan's face lit up with a brightness she had never seen before. For a moment, he stood still, as if making sure he wasn't imagining it. Then he ran. He threw himself into Emma's arms with a force that nearly knocked her back. She hugged him tightly, her eyes filling as she buried her face in his hair. His small fingers curled into her sweater, like he finally had somewhere to hold on. Ryan stood in the doorway, unable to move. His chest constricted as the burgundy airplane bounced wildly against Evan's chest with each excited breath. It caught the light in a way that made Ryan's vision blur. Joyce placed a gentle hand on Ryan's arm. "He's been waiting for you, too." Evan turned, still in Emma's embrace, and looked at Ryan with a trust so open, so immediate that it nearly broke him. Ryan crossed the room slowly and knelt beside them, placing a hand on Evan's back. "We're really happy you're coming home with us," he managed, his voice thick. Evan leaned into him, a gesture small but profound. The farewell at the center was unexpectedly emotional. Staff members who had watched Evan struggle through years of uncertainty gathered at the door. One of the caregivers wiped her eyes discreetly. Another knelt down to give Evan a soft, warm hug. "You're going to do great, sweetheart," she whispered. "Be kind to yourself. They're lucky to have you." Evan's grip on Emma's hand tightened. When they stepped outside, the cold air hit them all at once, an Iowa winter breeze that felt like both an ending and a beginning. In the car, buckled into the back seat, Evan chattered with a nervous excitement. "How long is the drive? Does your house have stairs? Are there other kids in your neighborhood? Can we make pancakes? I like pancakes. Do you have a park nearby?" Emma answered every question with a glowing smile. She kept turning around to check on him, brushing away tears she pretended were from the cold. Ryan drove, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds, not at Evan's face, but at the small plane resting against his chest. The same shape, the same deep burgundy color, the same way it swung gently from a string, just like Vicky used to wear. He remembered her tying the cardboard airplane he made onto that piece of string and wearing it proudly all summer, even when it frayed, even when the edges bent. He remembered her telling him she would fly away one day, somewhere safe, somewhere bright. And now here was Evan, a boy with her eyes, her smile, her quiet imagination, sitting in the back seat of his car, coming home with him. Evan looked up suddenly and caught Ryan's gaze in the mirror. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Ryan forced a small smile. "Yeah, buddy, I am okay." But inside, his thoughts whispered a truth he wasn't ready to share aloud. Not with Emma, not with Evan, not with anyone. If you're her child, if you're the piece of her the world didn't take from me, then you're home. The apartment felt different the moment Evan stepped inside. Maybe it was the way his small footsteps echoed down the hallway, or the way Emma exhaled softly, as if she had been holding her breath for years and finally could let it go. Ryan set the overnight bag down by the entryway. Evan hesitated, standing still in his coat, eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. "Welcome home," Emma said gently. The boy's fingers curled tighter around the strap of his backpack. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders relaxed. Emma reached out her hand. "Do you want to see your room?" Evan nodded, and she led him down the short hallway. Ryan followed a few steps behind, watching the child take everything in, the framed print of a cedar tree in the living room, the warm glow of the kitchen lights, the faint vanilla scent Emma used to calm her nerves while cleaning earlier. When they reached the second bedroom, Evan paused. The door was open, light spilling softly across the new rug and fresh bedding. The cloud-patterned sheets were tucked perfectly. The bookshelf held a few picture books and 2 early reader chapter books. The dresser drawers were half full, but waiting. The little wooden shelf Ryan installed hung quietly above the dresser, empty but ready. Evan stepped inside as if entering a sacred space. His hand reached the comforter first. He touched it, testing its softness. Then he moved to the bookshelf and traced the spine of a book. Finally, he walked to the bed and sat down, legs swinging above the rug. Emma knelt beside him. "If anything feels too new or too big, or too much, you can tell us." "Okay." He nodded, though he didn't speak. Then he slipped off his backpack and unzipped the front pocket. Ryan already knew what he was looking for. The burgundy airplane emerged, worn at the edges, tiny scratches across the surface from years of being held. Dropped, carried everywhere. Evan turned it in his hands thoughtfully before standing up and examining the room. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped to the bedpost and carefully looped the string over it. The airplane hung there, swaying gently in the warm air of the room. Ryan felt his throat close. He stood in the doorway beside Emma, unable to move. That little airplane, an ordinary object to anyone else, was a doorway to a childhood he had survived but never healed from. Watching Evan place it, there was like watching a memory materialize in the present. Emma leaned her head against Ryan's shoulder. "He likes it," she whispered, trying not to cry. Evan sat back on the bed, legs pulled up, arms around his knees, a position that said he was waiting for permission to belong. Emma walked over and sat beside him. "Would you like me to read you a story?" Evan nodded, then looked up at Ryan as if checking whether it was okay. Ryan managed a soft smile. "I'd love that." While Emma chose a book, Evan glanced again at the airplane on the bedpost, checking to make sure it was safe. Secure. Home. The story Emma read was simple, soothing, about a little bird finding its nest after a long journey. Evan leaned slowly into her side, inch by inch, until his head rested gently on her shoulder. Emma froze for a second, then relaxed, breathing him in like something sacred. When he finally crawled under the covers, he whispered, "Will you leave the door open a little?" "We will," Emma said, tucking him in. Ryan stood quietly near the doorway, watching, and for a brief moment he almost spoke. He almost told Emma everything. The resemblance, the memories, the long nights searching for Vicky, the terror and hope tangled inside him. He almost asked Evan where the airplane came from, who gave it to him, whether he remembered anything. But he didn't. The truth felt too heavy for a child who had just begun to trust, too dangerous for a night meant for safety, too fragile to place in a world still settling around them. So Ryan held it in his heart as he always had. Later, when the lights were off and Evan was asleep, Emma whispered, "We finally have a family." Ryan slipped an arm around her, pulling her close. "We do," he murmured. But inside, his vow was different. He promised to love Evan enough for both himself and Vicky, for the sister who protected him, who told stories to keep the darkness away, who wore a cardboard airplane like a badge of courage. He promised to be the father Evan needed, even if the past never revealed its full truth. At the doorway of Evan's new room, Emma and Ryan stood together, watching the child breathe softly beneath the cloud-patterned blankets. The burgundy airplane hung on the bedpost, swaying faintly in the quiet air, hopeful, fragile, tender, the beginning of a family, trembling, imperfect but real.